You've got this.
Meow, I'm Huples cat. One bomb, one dirty bomb, very limited nuclear war. That's what almost all preppers and almost all governments are planning for. Almost nobody's talking about multiple nuclear weapons being discharged and how to survive that, and then what are you going to do for the years after that event. This video is continuing to look at radiation sickness and how to survive it in the event of a large-scale nuclear war. But the information is also appropriate for a dirty bomb and for I highly doubt we've got this, but a single attack, a single bomb, that's the bedrock of how people prep and how emergency planners are preparing. The idea of preparing for 10 to 100 to 300 nuclear discharges over the United States of America is so beyond people's comprehension, nobody's really prepping for it, but perhaps they should. However, the advice in the video is decent for a dirty bomb. Hide, evacuate.
There is no subway, there are no buses, there are no streetcars, nothing for now. We're all stuck together.
Toronto flights to New York are suspended at this moment. Pearson Airport is on backup power.
Well, reports of huge anxiety, obviously, particularly in New York. Tens of thousands of people in the streets, massive traffic jams.
There is no evidence of any terrorism whatsoever.
Pretty much all public transport is going to be suspended. Most of the highways, if not all of them, are going to be closed to all traffic apart from military traffic. And the roads that are open are going to be jammed by accidents and people without gasoline in their cars. News will be saturated by officials telling you the basics of nuclear physics and also no need to panic and what to do. What to do is only going to encompass the first few days to the first few weeks. Nobody's going to tell you the unpleasant truth about what you're going to do a year after the event if you're not dead. Already having my nuclear winter here.
This is BBC Television from London. We are interrupting this programme for an emergency announcement. This is an emergency broadcast from the BBC, on behalf of His Majesty's government. Information of a possible nuclear strike against this country has been received.
The use of nuclear weapons, whether it be in Europe or South Asia or even the United States of America, will cause absolute panic. Be ready for that. Don't panic.
We can now confirm the trajectories of the missiles. They are London, Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, Belfast, Bristol, York, Newcastle, Brighton, Glasgow. If you are in or within a 10-mile radius of these cities, evacuate now.
So the bombs drop. Millions to tens of millions of people are going to die in the first few days after that happens. Firestorms will engulf most of our major cities and most of our towns, most of our forests. The clouds will be fully thick with debris and ash, burnt people and burnt plastics. After D-Day or Death Day, as it'll probably get called by a few survivors, all of this snow will be grey and black. The radiation will pass around the planet, really covering the northern hemisphere, then the southern hemisphere. We're looking at a period of days to weeks to months of a very, very unpleasant time. You were prepared for this. You'd invested time and money in it, and you'd watched my videos. You survived. You were also extremely lucky. We'll all need a lot of luck if we actually have a World War III using nuclear weaponry. The tiny part of the Earth that you live on wasn't directly hit by nuclear weapons and has indirectly avoided the majority of the fallout. The blast waves and the firestorms have left your area not too bad. You survived World War III. What now? What a beautiful day. Oddly enough, the radiation products from a nuclear weapon that's exploded are actually on a scale less dirty than a dirty bomb and less dirty than a nuclear meltdown.
It's now clear that the Soviet Union has suffered one of the worst disasters in the history of nuclear power. Massive quantities of radiation have apparently been released in an accident at the Chernobyl power station in the Ukraine. Many thousands of people live in the vicinity. Moscow admits there have been casualties, and signs are that a big relief operation is underway.
The radiation from the Chernobyl meltdown spread far and wide across Europe. In Ukraine, the radiation from Chernobyl around the plant and some of the fallout zones away from the plant remains a critical threat to human life to this day. On a similar time period of 4 decades, Nagasaki and Hiroshima, because they were airburst and they were nuclear weapons, not a nuclear plant meltdown, largely got the background radiation of the rest of Japan. I know.
The Soviet news agency TASS said one of the reactors at Chernobyl, north of Kiev, had been damaged.
but there are no details of how serious the accident was. Reports from Kiev say all bus services in the city have been cancelled. The vehicles are being used instead to evacuate the Chernobyl area, with a population estimated at around 50,000.
For a dirty bomb or a nuclear plant meltdown, the rational response is to evacuate away from the radiation zone and possibly never to return there if that was where your home was. And you've got about 20 to 30 minutes to move out of Dodge if you're uninjured. If you're very close to the dirty bomb, you're probably not going to do very well. But at least modern medicine's probably going to be available for you once you're rescued. If it's a nuclear war, it's entirely different.
The wind blew a cloud of radiation over the Baltic states towards Scandinavia. Some radiation monitors recorded levels 10 times above normal. In Sweden, about 600 people were evacuated from a nuclear plant north of Stockholm. Authorities there thought at first the radiation levels must be coming from a leak in their own reactor. Some Western scientists suggest the type of pollution detected could indicate a nuclear meltdown.
So you need to be as far away from the radiation as possible and/or erect barriers between you and the source of radiation to limit exposure to ionizing radiation, whether it's from a dirty bomb, a nuclear plant meltdown, or a widespread nuclear war. You, like me, probably don't have a designed root cellar/emergency shelter. I plan to improvise one in my own home. I do have pretty thick walls, and I'm fairly confident that the integrity of the house will not be damaged by even a widespread nuclear war. In 2023, this type and scale of weapon is highly unlikely to be used, and the Hiroshima and Nagasaki weapon yields are actually now tactical battlefield nuclear weapon yields. Russian ICBMs would be 800 kilotons, probably with multiple warheads, so 50 to 100 kiloton yields, and sending 4 to 8 nuclear bombs around and into a target. Try not to be near a target.
An enormous amount of radioactivity must have gotten out of the power plant. And I spoke with some people in Sweden this morning, and they indicate that they have found iodine in Sweden and cesium, which very strongly suggests that there was a core meltdown.
The accident at 3 Mile Island in the United States in 1979 was a partial meltdown. The nuclear rods melted and fuel pooled at the bottom of the reactor. In the Russian accident, the worst possibility is that the process went the disastrous next step, the core melting down and the radioactive fuel burning into the earth or escaping as gas. There's also the possibility that the pressure vessel ruptured, leaking a vast cloud of radioactive steam. And one big problem which Western scientists see in Soviet plants is the lack of a containment building. When all else fails, there's no outer shell to hold the radioactivity in.
CDC advice. Shelter in place will be enforced in wartime. Highways will be blockaded and reserved for military use only. Most modern detached homes will block almost no radiation. Create a safe zone inside your home. Indeed, prepare it and stock in advance. If Russia or China sinks a US carrier, I suspect buying stuff might be difficult. Think 28 days, and right from the beginning ration to use this 28-day food supply over 56 days. As a minimum, water is essentially only going to be for drinking. Ration it tightly right from the beginning. Stay inside that shelter for as long as you physically and mentally can. Have the means to dig yourself out of it if the building collapses. These are all good items, but think about long-lasting and reusable items. You are all going to be food rationed very strictly, so literally lick all the plates and cutlery clean. Again, as I said in the previous video, have colour-coordinated individual plates and cutlery. Food waste will no longer exist once nuclear bombs drop. Now, aspirin, charcoal and ipecac are all strangely enough items that would cause serious harm if used in certain types of high radiation events. I do not think you should be stocking these for radiation, as we'll see in next week's video. For sheltering, it's always going to be best to get into a decent shelter within 10 minutes of a detonation, even if you are 10 miles away. Stay there for 48 hours and then move. I advise 2 weeks and then go home. This requires planning. You have to be carrying food and water with you, and it has to be accessible immediately. If you're on the 60th floor of a building and all of your emergency supplies when you're carrying the basement, hopefully you can get to the basement before the bomb hits, because that's where you're going to be staying. There is some research that suggests that leapfrogging is actually better than going directly to a shelter. This is arguable. It wasn't done under actual nuclear attack conditions, but I think there is some sense. Getting into a decent shelter within 10 minutes of a detonation is always going to be a good idea, and it has to be a decent shelter. It takes 15 to 20 minutes to get to a decent shelter. Consider it and go for it. The idea is to make sure that you're actually encased and are surrounded by nothing radioactive as the radiation starts to fall. The exposure from the blast is already going to hit you. The exposure from the radiation is what's then going to compromise your life. If you're close enough to get a radiation dose from the exposure that's going to kill you, there's probably not a lot you can do. Whatever you do, stay 48 hours in that shelter, even if you have no food and no water and no heating. Do not move outside for 48 hours. At that point, go directly to the major shelter or use some leapfrogging shelters to get there. What you don't want to be doing is to be outside for more than 15 to 30 minutes after the detonation for at least a month after the nuclear bomb's gone off. The old civil defense stuff from the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s and even 90s remains incredibly relevant. You want to get access to that material now, you want to have nuclear survival skills from Crescent now, and you want to have a plan in place now. With limited space and money, do what you can do to get actually ready for a full nuclear attack. Don't just go, oh, I'll die. You probably won't. And even if you don't die, you probably then won't want to die. If you're trying to cover yourself for a nuclear war, remember, you're going to need a lot of luck, but you're also very well prepared then for a dirty bomb or a nuclear plant meltdown. I would point out that 5, 7 and 8 on this civil defense checklist of 8 actually remain very valid today, but are very much not discussed and not focused upon. Well, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a subscription. Next week, I'm actually going to get into the actual over-the-counter medications like Gaviscon you can buy, what doses you will need, and how often you'll have to give it if you have radiation sickness. I'm also going to talk about what you do if you have radiation sickness that you can't treat, and also what happens if you get repeated doses of radiation sickness. Because in a nuclear war event, you will get radiation sickness, and you probably will have it more than once. Thanks for watching. Doodles! This is a 2023 Wolfie Terrier video production. Wolfie is not planning to be eaten in the event of a nuclear war. Wolfie is planning to eat me. Wolfie woo.